Hi, I'm Diane.
And I'm John, and you're listening to Paranoid Fantasy.
The podcast about bizarre events.
And the people involved.
What are we talking about today, John?
This episode is titled The Shameless Audacity of Pamela Hupp, Part 1. Disclaimer, as ever, this podcast is intended for insight. We get our facts from thorough research, but in some cases, details we share may differ from other accounts or actual events. We do our best to get it right.
Well, Pam Marie Hupp was born on October the 10th, 1958. She grew up in Delwood, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis. She was a cheerleader. As a young adult, she worked in the life insurance industry. Seemingly a normal child and a young adult, working woman. You want to trust people in the insurance agency that you're affiliated with because, that's important work. But the first kind of cloud that was cast on her was on two occasions when she was fired for forging life insurance documents.
But we didn't find any documentation of her serving time for any of those crimes. Pamela's husband, Mark Hupp, was a minor league baseball player for the Texas Rangers. He went on to become a carpenter after he didn't get drafted onto the team.
In 2001, Pam and Mark settled in O'Fallon, Missouri, where she worked as an administrator for State Farm. They flipped real estate on the side. Their company was called H2 Partners, LLC.
Yep, and looking at, pictures of her and her family, she does kind of look like a woman next door. In fact, you live part-time in the Midwest, and I've lived in the Midwest, and she really looks like anyone, you could see just walking into Ross or what's the grocery store there?
Like
you have Winn-Dixie, you have
we don't have Winn-Dixie there.
No, but what groceries do you have what groceries?
Oh, like walking into
what's the grocery store
Kroger
you go to?
Store.
Kroger. Yeah, she'd be in like the fruit aisle of Kroger.
Yeah.
Would she let you cut in line?
No.
No.
I don't think so. From some of the things I read, I think she might even
But she might steal a handicap spot.
Oh, for
without
sure.
the sticker.
It seems like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it kind of isn't keeping with somebody you'd be racing and fighting for shopping at the last shopping cart.
How is she on Black Friday? Okay, moving on. In 2010, Pamela stopped working. She began claiming disability benefits for an alleged injury for back, neck, and leg pain. This would come into play later in our story, which actually I don't think it does, but
I think where it does is where she was said that she was an unreliable witness because of a head injury. So she kind of acted like things came in and out of focus,
and that was the reason that her story kept changing.
Allegedly said,
yes,
yeah.
In the stories we're about to move into. While working at State Farm, Pam met Elizabeth K. Meyer Faria, also known as Betsy.
Betsy lived on Sumac Drive in Troy, Missouri, with her husband, Russell Scott Faria, and he was known as Russ. They lived with their two daughters that were from Betsy's previous relationship.
In 2010, Betsy was sadly diagnosed with breast cancer. In 2011, her cancer was considered terminal.
December 22nd, 2011, Betsy she changed the sole beneficiary of her $150K life insurance policy from her husband Russ to Hupp. This would be close to about $195,000 in today's economy.
Right. So filling in the blanks, it seemed like Pamela and Betsy worked together, and through some of the dramatic series that we saw on Amazon Prime, it looks like Pamela befriended Betsy, and that was where the scheme began. Later on, after the events played out, Pamela Hupp would later tell investigators that the life insurance policy was changed by Betsy in order for her to set up a trust for Betsy's daughters, because Betsy did not trust her husband, Russ, with the money. So she left that in the hands of Pamela to disseminate into the daughter's hands later.
Later that story would change again because Pam would testify that Betsy wanted her to keep the money for herself.
Right, and I think that happened, again, we're kind of jumping ahead, but when the daughters never received the money, as you said, Pamela changed her story and said, and now in fact, Betsy wanted me to keep that money. We should also note that Russ Faria was left on a separate life insurance policy from Betsy, and that was worth $100,000, which is equivalent to $130,000 in today's economy.
Yeah, so on December the 27th, 5 days after Betsy re-signed one of her policies to Pam, Betsy attended a chemotherapy session at Alvin J. Siteman Cancer Center in St. Louis, and then she visited her mother for a game night with family.
Yes, this is actually speaking of that Amazon Prime series, the thing about Pam, starring Renee Zellweger. This is one of my favorite scenes because you see it's just like a very beautiful house. It's around Christmas time. You've got the grandmother at the at the dining table with Betsy, and the two daughters are kind of doing their own thing, probably on their cell phones, and you see this blonde-haired woman in a puffy jacket. She's like a staunch figure. She walks in with her, I guess she always had like a cold pop from the gas station in her hands. She circles it around with the ice and the straw, and it's always making that, the straw sucking at the bottom of the, and she walks in there with her dirty boots and plops herself down on this big white beanbag chair. And then as she leaves, the daughter's like, "Oh, you got my chair dirty." And she's like, "Oh, no, it was dirty when I walked in." But it was so obvious that, she's just in her own world. And I also want to mention in that film series, the thing about Pam, the music is so good. And just the way that they play up the art direction of living in the Midwest. Because it is, has kind of that 1950s, 60s village feel with the Christmas lights and the way they had their house decorated, and I don't know, just it's very charming, and Pamela's so deceiving. It's just that hint of something's off.
Yeah, something's a little off. She makes this dark mark on that white beanbag and then lies about it in the movie. And it's
like that one person that's in your face smiling and being so nice to you, but you can see the wheels are spinning.
It's like she realizes that everybody around her is about half asleep.
Mm-hmm.
And she's awake and going about her business.
Yes, the enemy is in the room. So Russ, Betsy's husband Russ, he spent the evening watching movies at a friend's house from about 6 p.m. to 9 p.m.
Yeah, he was originally set to pick up Betsy from her mom's place to take her home, but Pam drove to Betsy's mom's house unexpectedly and then insisted to drive her home before Russ had the opportunity.
Yeah, that's the scene I was talking about in the movie with the beanbag.
Yeah, she walks in there.
Yeah, so she's like, well, at least in the film adaptation, Betsy's like, "No, you don't have to take me home. Russ is going to come and pick me up." And Pam is like, No, I insist. I insist on driving you home. And that's where we kind of can, we start to feel that something is off because she's so determined. And throughout this whole story, it's really interesting. You see, it's so obvious that Pam is the perpetrator.
Yeah.
And everyone just, seems to look the other way.
Well, she's always helping.
That's a really good point.
But yet, I drove all the way out here.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't want to put her out. Oh, she's so good. She's so helping. We don't want to make her drive all the way back home. We'll go ahead and let her drive Betsy.
And it's the epitome of that passive aggressive. It's being very passive, but under that that mask, she's being very aggressive. Okay, so Pam would claim that she dropped Betsy off at the Faria home around 7 p.m. and she first stated that she noticed Russ's truck was in the driveway. She also noticed that she mentioned she did not go into the Faria home.
Meanwhile, Russ would arrive home about 9:30 after stopping at Arby's fast food on the way. His timeline would later be substantiated by footage from that Arby's camera. And it's funny because just sometimes little things that happen in life you don't really think much of, and then it ends up like saving you or sinking you. It can go both ways. So kind of makes a good case for staying on the straight and narrow.
Yes. I mean, I'm not a big fan of being recorded everywhere we go, but at the end of the day, as long as you're not up to anything good, it can come back to save you in some weird situation, paranoid fantasy like this.
Right.
Okay, at 9:40 p.m., Russ made a frantic call to 911 stating that he had found his wife, Betsy, dead and that she had killed herself. The call was an unusual tone and very dramatic, according to detectives. This unusual response and the jump to an assertion that suicide was the cause of Betsy's death would really quickly come back to haunt Russ, because detectives quickly noticed that Betsy had been stabbed over 55 times, with her wrists cut and a knife left in her neck.
And what struck me at the time was the fact that he walks in from a game night. He sees the knife sticking out of her neck, and he notices her wrist right away. And he knew she had terminal cancer, and she just had a chemo, and she'd had some really bad, as everybody that has chemo just about has, bad bouts with it, and really knocked her out. And that can be very depressing. And so it really does make sense that he would think that. He hadn't examined her. He saw what he saw, and he grabbed the phone.
Mm-hmm.
And he was hysterical. He might, even if he had looked closely, he might not have noticed, because in those instances, he really did love her, and I think his senses sort of shut off. He was going into shock.
Yeah, and as we see, like even in the Amanda Knox case, I think that was the young girl that was in Italy when her roommate died. They really judged her because her unusual response to the murder, and that really can play a part in the minds of the detectives or jury sometimes. If someone doesn't respond the way that we think is commonly, socially accepted.
Yeah.
But also, I want to point out, I mean, although we do find out that Russ was not responsible for the death of his wife, and we don't know him, the truth could be somewhere in the middle, And I'm just putting that out because we don't necessarily know what the dynamic of Russ and Betsy was. I mean, we see through obviously the Amazon series and the Dateline series, they portray him as a very sympathetic person that was wronged. But there may have been challenges in their relationship, and maybe Pamela played on that, knowing that there would be some tension there.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned the Midwest before, and how there's that facade of the innocence, but sometimes it can be like a David Lynch film where, under the grass, the ants have this war going on. I mean, I think while different places are stylized and their the surroundings are stylized, the people might even be stylized, it's still the human condition, and it's shared worldwide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we never know what's going on behind the closed doors. Police arrived at the Faria home within 10 minutes of Russ's 911 call. They concluded that Betsy had in fact been deceased for at least an hour.
Well, in most homicides, lovers and spouses are the first to be suspected. Detectives assumed Russ had murdered his wife because of the unusual reaction, in addition to the fact that there was no forced entry and the house was relatively absent of the blood trails that you would expect if someone had just tramped in there and then ran out. Cops assumed that Russ killed Betsy and had enough time before calling 911 to clean up the scene, with that hour and a half possible
window.
Yeah. And the blood-stained pair of slippers that was found in Russ's closet were also damning. It looked like maybe he had, in fact, come home, put his slippers on, was relaxing, and then when Betsy was dropped off, he killed her.
Let's take a break, and then we'll hear more about this unfolding and who comes to be blamed. Okay, so Russ was arrested the day after Betsy was found dead in his home. He failed a polygraph test, and we should note polygraph tests are not admissible in court, but they do help detectives understand, if someone's being honest or not. They still, for some reason, depend on them.
Hupp was also questioned because she was the last person that saw her alive. So she offered claims that Russ had a violent temper, that he was a heavy drinker, and that he had threatened Betsy. Pam also claimed that Betsy was thinking that Russ...
Well, she was thinking of leaving Russ.
Right. That, yeah, she wasn't... I don't think she... I never was clear that... I don't think she thought that he was, like, fooling around or anything. I think she, just because of his temper and his drinking, she...
Which is... It was irregardless of what was the truth. She was starting to set the stage because...
To put him in a certain light.
The best defense is offense. You know,
that's right.
She's putting that, and again in this series, it really made it seem like she was becoming chummy with the DA and the judge, and trying to kind of, as you said, help solve this case, which I'm sure a lot of people mentioned in the community that they were suspicious of her from day one. Pamela began to frame Russ. She told in her police interview that they should search Betsy's laptop. Now this is like this is very far reaching. She indicated that police would find a document written by Betsy where Betsy describes fears of being murdered by Russ. And they later found out that this document was not made on a program on Betsy's computer, that it was made by someone else. You know,
it was the only document on our whole computer that was, I think it was 95.
That it was a different Microsoft Word. It was transferred onto the computer.
Yeah.
So that should tell you something. And on January 4th, 2012, the day after Betsy's funeral, Russ was charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. Now, it is incredible to think that the police department, the district attorney, and the judge rushed to this judgment around Russ, especially when we see the evidence that should have cleared Russ immediately.
Yeah, you would think. Russ was unable to make the $250,000 bail, which would be these days like trying to come up with about $310,000. So it was a lot of money, and so he was held in the county jail for 2 years until his trial began on November 18th, 2013.
Yes. Enter Russ's defense attorney, Joel Schwartz. Mr. Schwartz argued in court that Russ Faria had a solid alibi. He was at his friend's house, which was 20 miles from the crime scene, until after 9 p.m. on the night of Betsy's murder. Russ's friends would back up these claims as witnesses. Schwartz also pointed to the video footage from the Arby's fast food restaurant, as well as the receipt of his dinner, and several other purchases over the course of the evening. Cell phone tracking data also corroborated the fact that Russ was not in the area of the crime during the window of opportunity for the murder.
The prosecuting district attorney,
Leah
Askey, she countered Schwartz's claim. Incredibly, she proposed that Russ's friends, who were known gamers and did role-playing games, she claimed that his friends, they covered for Russ in an ultimate role play scenario scheme. She claimed that the friends held onto his cell phone, posed as him to buy food, and falsified his whereabouts to cover for him.
And that is a really far-reaching prosecution, because it's really incredible to think in this day and time that a jury of 12 people would fall for that.
And, well, you know what? This to me is like one of the most paranoid, fantastical things, is that how just one word or one sentence can spin and skew reality, because people in their mind have something a certain way. Like, so anybody over the age of that would be like real tech savvy and be gamers and you know have normal lives, and that's part of their normal life. They play those games to say, oh, they did these role-playing games, so they've got to be messed up, you know. It's like, and then there's this
some
whole
basement
rabbit
somewhere.
trail. Yeah,
like covering for this really complicated murder plot.
It's anytime prejudice is unleashed to do the dirty work.
Yeah, and bizarrely, later on you told me in your research that they found that these friends of Russ weren't even aware that they were being framed.
No.
And like what do they call it? Accomplices for this
Yeah.
murder, and they were never charged.
Right, because if those accusations were, those allegations were proved, they would in fact be accessories to the crime, and they should have been charged if they really believe that, which almost makes you, it almost ties back into where later they reopened this. They looked at the case and they looked at it from the prosecuting side. They sort of reviewed it because there were some inconsistencies in procedures. It seemed.
So, in a separate secret hearing during Russ Faria's trial, Hupp claimed that she had put $100,000 of Betsy's payout, the life insurance payout, into a trust for Betsy's daughters. She would later admit that she had not done this when questioned in 2014 deposition. In August of 2016, it was revealed that Hupp had in fact loaned most of the payout to her son Travis. It was wired through her company, H2 Partners, LLC. Back to Russ's trial.
Yeah. In the trial, the judge refused to allow Russ's attorney Schwartz to present evidence implicating Pam Hutt as an alternative suspect. So she wasn't even brought into question. This included the cell phone records, which placed Pamela in the Faria home for up to 30 minutes after she claimed to have dropped Betsy in the drive. The judge also refused the jury to hear about the sudden change in Betsy's life insurance policy beneficiary to Pamela days before her death. My research is showing. Of course, that's alleged. We can't read the judge's mind, but those things did not come up in the trial.
Also, in favor of Russ, there was no trace of blood on his body or clothes on the night of Betsy's murder. But despite this evidence, on November 21st of 2013, a jury of 12 peers convicted Russ on both counts of first-degree murder and armed criminal action.
1 month later, he was sentenced to life plus 30 years in prison with no possibility of parole, and this was at Jefferson City Correctional Center, where he was to be incarcerated.
Right. We are going to continue with part 2 of the shameless audacity of Pamela Hupp, but first wanted to mention our sources very quickly for our research. Include St. Louis Magazine, Fox 2 Now, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, The Washington Post, NBC News, Lincoln News Now, Wikipedia, Mercury News, Digital First Media, ID Crime Feed, The Independent, Newsweek, Grunge, and Rolling Stone, as well as Dateline. So, yeah, we're going to continue with this story on the next episode of Paranoid Fantasy.